Chapter 4. The Tragical Story of Merchant Zorab. Badam was very impressed with the unfortunate story of the blacksmith Iskander, and, at dawn the next day, after saying goodbye to the unhappy blacksmith, he took the road. He stopped at Zorab's house to spend the night and tell him the blacksmith Iskander's secret. And at the end of the report, Zorab said, "You did what I asked you. Now it's my turn to tell you my own secret. My father was the richest man in this town. Our house was right in the center and, in beauty and magnificence, it surpassed all others. Beside it, there was a beautiful garden, with many fruit trees, through which crossed a stream, lined with granite and trimmed with rose bushes. In the spring, when everything started to green and bloom, what a wonder this garden wasn't! The flowers spread their perfume and, everywhere, the silver voices of the birds resounded. I had a sister, who was in friendship with the daughters of the king of arenas. Every year, morphed into doves, they came flying in packs toward our garden, where they ate, drank and had fun, bathing in the stream. I had the habit of walking in the garden every day. But when the princesses arrived there, I was strictly forbidden to enter in it. For security reasons, when my sister's friends arrived there, she went inside and locked the gate. There was then one day, when as usual, the daughters of the king of arenas would come flying for another visit to my sister. I then got up very early and, entering the garden, I hid myself behind the rose bushes. The sun had already reached the height of noon, when suddenly, I saw 3 doves coming from the clouds toward our garden. My sister already expected this since a long time. And here is what I witnessed. The 3 doves, abandoning suddenly their bird clothes, became 3 beautiful maidens. Of the 3, which were sisters, the one who pleased me the most was the youngest. I decided then that, whatever the cost, I would get hold of her. After the princesses went down to the stream, for the customary bath, I waited for the right moment and, surreptitiously, slipped myself down to where they had left their dove clothes. I grabbed then the younger sister's one and returned subtly to my hiding place. When the bathing was over, they returned quickly to the place where they had left their bird garments. The 2 older sisters had already found their dove clothes, but the youngest, as much as she sought, she couldn't find hers. Then she turned to my sister and said, "Had we not asked you to not let anyone enter the garden while we were here? There's no doubt that there is someone hiding somewhere who has stolen my clothes." My sister remained silent for a moment, not knowing what to say to the princess. She made all possible conjectures, trying to guess who could have stolen the dove garment of the princess, since she herself had locked the gate. Expecting to be able to catch the thief, they searched every corner of the garden. Suddenly, the searches were successful, and they found me at last, well hidden behind the rose bush. When she saw me crouching there, my sister got very angry, and began to yell at me. She tried to take the dove garment from me, but she was barred by the princess, who said, "Let it go. He has no guilt. It's just my fate. This had already been predicted by a fairy and, furthermore, this dove garment has lost its power when it was touched by human hands." Then, she turned to her sisters and said, "Dear sisters, take my goodbyes to our parents, and ask them to not weep for me. For, about it, what we can do is only obey the wishes of Allah. Allah wanted it and, thus, it happened." Then, they kissed each other and parted. The two older sisters morphed immediately into doves and flew to the world from which they had come. Meanwhile, the youngest, who had been standing there, walked towards me and, taking my hand, told me, "Now, I belong to you. You are my husband and I'm your wife. Let's go to your father, ask for his blessing, and then we will get married." My happiness was unspeakable. We left the garden and went into the house. But my nasty sister had already gone to my father and, informing him about what had happened, accused me of having insulted her friends. My father called me to his presence and told me, menacingly, "Not only you have violated drastically our rules of hospitality, as well as infringed the commandments followed by your sister's friends, the daughters of the king of Arenas. Being your father, it was my intention to marry you in the future with someone according to my choice. But you wanted to do this according to your own preferences, not even taking into account the possibility of me not giving you my consent. From now on, no longer consider me as your father, and I will no longer consider you as my son, and furthermore, I will make you disinherited. Take your bride and go with her wherever you want. And get out of my sight, you impostor, for that my eyes do not have to contemplate you anymore." It was in vain that I knelt down at his feet. Also in vain were my pleas of forgiveness. He did not let himself be appeased, and screamed even more angrily, "If you do not leave my house today, I will ask my servants to expel you out, with no mercy." I then returned, distressed and discouraged, to meet my fiancée. She then asked me why I was so sad. I could not hide her the truth, and told her everything that my father had said to me. She then tried to console me, saying, "Don't be sad, my dear husband. Take this money and buy the most splendid house in the city. You must obey your father's orders and leave his house." She then gave me many gold coins, and I bought, immediately, a magnificent house. We moved into it and got married. But then my wife said to me, "If you want me to belong to you forever, and that we never have to be apart, you must promise me that, when one of our children is born, you will not take him into your arms. For, if you do that, we should separate for the rest of our lives." I promised then to do what she had asked of me. Then, she gave me more money, and I opened this warehouse and started to dedicate myself to the purchase and sale of goods. After a year, she gave birth to a beautiful girl. I felt very gratified with the birth of the child, and dedicated myself to her with all my heart. Constantly, I had the desire of hugging and kissing her. But I remembered, just in time, what my wife had told me, and held me back. But once, when she was out, the temptation was so great that I ended up taking the girl in my arms and kissing her. At this moment, she came in and saw what I was doing. She became very angry and repressed me, saying, "Had I not told you to not take the child in your arms, and that if you did it, you would suffer very much?" With these words, she pulled the girl from my arms and tore her into 2 pieces. Immediately, the child became a bird and went flying. But, even repressing me severely, she still made me a concession, saying, "This time, you will be forgiven. But if this comes to be repeated, you will lose what you most love in life, and we will separate forever." After another year, she presented me with such a beautiful son, that neither the sagas would be able to represent him, or the feathers, to describe him. The father's love burned my heart. But although the desire to hug and kiss him was immense, I didn't even dare touch my son. However, there was one day when, no longer being capable of containing my desires, I took advantage of the moment she was gone and, taking the child in my arms, I kissed him. At this moment, she went in and saw what I was doing and, out of her mind in so much anger, she snatched the child from my arms and, like a hungry wolf while grabbing a little calf, she licked her and the child morphed into a bird and started flying. Then, she said to me, "Well, now goodbye, and may Allah preserve you. The culprit of your disgrace was yourself. It was not without reason that I warned you." Then, she morphed into a dove and lifted her flight. Deeply embittered, I followed her with my eyes until it was possible. When she disappeared, definitely, from my eyesight, the separation caused me a so great anguish that, for several days, I couldn't eat nor sleep, and cried all the time. But when I realized that, acting this way, I wouldn't change anything in my situation, I stopped crying and resumed my activities as a merchant. Every day, I go to my warehouse, and dedicate myself to the buying and selling of goods. And from all corners of the world, buyers come in search of my products. But, as soon as I receive the payment for the sold goods, my wife comes with the 2 children and says, "Your own father kicked you out of his house, but I haven't abandoned you in these difficult days. I gave you money and you bought a house. I gave you more money and you installed this trade, and begin to manage it. However, bad was the reward you gave me for my services. Because of your stubbornness, I was forced to take the life of my 2 innocent children and, after all that, you can't imagine how much I suffered. Although the culprit of all this is yourself, the impression I get is that, to you, it means nothing, because you feel even satisfied with what happened, since you were taking advantage of my riches. The buyers come to your warehouse in crowds, and you sell them your goods with large profits. But I will not allow you to take any advantage of that. Resume the goods and burn them before my eyes." So, in obedience to her, I take the goods back and transform them into a fire. She stands there, watching the flames rise, and only resume her flight when the flames reach the end. In some ways, I feel happy with my trade, for only so I can, at least occasionally, see my beloved wife and my dear children. There is the sense of what, for you, is a mystery.